this. So the first thing is, okay, let's start before we arrive here. What is capoeira for you, Obadele?
For me, capoeira is an instrument of African liberation. That's what I see it, being in the past, currently, and then also in the future. I also see it as something that I see it as African liberation on the global sense, but also on the individual sense as well. In the sense of not being confined to one Eurasian martial arts, which is what a lot of people are familiar with on the one hand. Another sense is not being confined to the conceptual incarceration of what capoeira has been boxed into. Whether people say it must be acrobatics, hop around, or they say it must be a ritual, or it must be a game, or it must be whatever. I think that capoeira can either be an open field filled with possibilities, or it can be a straitjacket. And I've seen that over the years in terms of how people approach it. Either someone will say, yeah, it's all of this, but they say, but it has to be this. That's not capoeira, that's not capoeira. And, for myself and looking at it and studying it, I'm more one who will look at everything and see capoeira in it. If two people are playing a berimbau, I say that's capoeira. I listen to how they're going, or a conversation or an email exchange. I see capoeira in all of these different things. I remember reading a quote from Mr. Pastinha, capoeira tudo que a boca come. And different people see it different ways. One brother said, it just means that's what he was using to eat. He was getting money, and that's what he... And I was like, I don't see it like that at all. I see it much like it's everything. Anything, all of these things, can be seen as capoeira. I remember reading another story about Mr. Bimba, about a young student of his who went to one harder. He got beat up, so he decided to go back home and filled his mouth up with hot pepper, and then came to the harder the next time. So as they were coming to shake hands, the original pepper spray sprayed it in the guy's face, and then pop. And as the story goes, when Mr. Bimba heard that, he said, "Isso é a capoeira." That this is the real capoeira. So it's not, hearing these types of anecdotes in different contexts just made me think that capoeira isn't Rabo de Raia. And that's what, sometimes people say it's just this collection of movements, this, that, Armada, that's capoeira, period. And more into what are the core thoughts, philosophies, foundations, and then all of those things that we associate with capoeira then become expressions in different forms of that core philosophy. So that's been something that I've really been trying to get to, of what's that core. And once, I feel like that core is understood, then the movements really start to make sense in and of themselves, as opposed to sometimes, again, I hear people or I've seen people who just memorize movements. I memorize this one looks nice, memorize that one, memorize this one, memorize this one, memorize this one, and that's capoeira, as opposed to, an idea of when you get hit, that's when you know the utility of negativa. That's when it makes sense. You can do it just because that's the rule, and people say when they do this, I do this. But actually getting hit makes you understand how to do negativa, and makes you understand when to do negativa, when not to. Sometimes you'll do it too quickly, and the person is just standing there looking at you and can just step on you. So all of these things, I feel learning it in context, it makes it organic, one, and then it puts you in the position of those who originally formulated it, that they weren't doing it, again, in my view, just to do something and say, we're doing something that's African, or we're doing something. It was something that had very much practical usage. And what I feel like has happened to capoeira now is something like a museum artifact, a thing that's been taken out of its context in order to put it on the stand, and then we talk about this thing, oh, look at this thing. But again, when it's in context, you'll see a mask. The people were using that mask to accomplish some type of objective. If you see a spear, they were using that spear. Once it's removed from the context, then it becomes sort of like a sterilized type of object that we're now, looking at. So, those are some of the core things in terms of how I understand, capoeira really as those core ideas. And we were talking about this before. I think in terms of the actual interaction, the core of it is attacking without being attacked, being able to attack without being attacked. And sometimes, and I've actually done this with people who don't have any background in capoeira, and I'll just say, don't let me hit you, try to hit me. They start doing they've never learned any movement, they never memorized, they never even heard of it before, but they start doing all the movements that we know. They start doing esquiva. They're trying not to be attacked. They're trying to attack me, so they end up doing mealua, martelo, whatever, because they're attempting to accomplish the goal organically, and this is the best way for them to accomplish a goal. They'll see how I'm doing it, they'll say, oh, he's accomplishing the goal very well, so let me...
That works.
Yeah, so let me, do what works. And then I compare that to people who do have a background in either capoeira or other, martial arts, combat sciences, whatever, that sometimes if you take somebody who's been studying it, there was a guy who came, he said, oh, I've been studying for 12 years. So, okay, well, come on. And I asked him, all right, have you studied it as a game, as a ritual, acrobatics, as a fight, as a... He said, oh, I studied it as all of them. I said, okay. So let's do like some light sparring. You could tell he has never done it as a fight. He may have thought he did it as a fight, but even like the slightest touch was like, oh, like he's going to... He ended up coming back, and some of the other people were like, he's not going to come back. But he ended up coming back, as long as he was here. He was working at one of the embassies.
Brazilian?
No, half Ghanaian, half German. And there are quite a few of those, more than you would, I guess, imagine offhand. A lot of Ghanaians go to Europe. Don't see any Ghanaian women, I suppose, and we see their children coming back, right, looking for identity, looking for that connection to Africa. And I think that's also how they approach capoeira, again, like as a museum artifact. Like, this is the thing that's, if I have this mask, it gets me in contact with Africa, as opposed to I'm trying to accomplish an objective. I'm trying to defend my family. I'm trying to defend my nation, my race, any of those types of, I guess, broader objectives. It's more like, who am I? And this, is who I am now. So, yeah. So that's, in terms of interaction, attacking without being attacked. And again, when I see people who don't have any background and they come with that objective, they start doing it, doing all the moves. And those who do have the background, or are supposed to have the background, they end up struggling because they've memorized a rule situation. If I do this, then you're not going to headbutt me when I'm upside down. I'm doing it, ow, and you can't do anything, or whatever they have a preconceived notion of. So now when you do something that's different from the rules that they're used to, it's like they've been thrown into the pool and don't know how to swim, or they're a fish and they've been taken out of the water that they've been used to. So now what do I do? So that's one. But I think even to get to a much broader understanding of what capoeira is doing the correct thing at the correct time, because you may not need to attack, or you may not need to not be attacked. It may not even come to that. And doing the correct thing at the correct time will tell you when it needs to come to that level of interaction, where it needs to come to another level of interaction. And we actually have a poster up of Ma'at. Are you familiar with Ma'at? It's the very first set of laws among human beings in ancient Kemet, so-called ancient Egypt. There are 42, some call it admonitions, but basically, or declarations. Basically, it goes, things like, I have not stolen, I have not pilfered from the deities, I have not polluted the water, all these things, and there are 42 of them. And the idea is that you have to be able to say those honestly in order to, be elevated to this level Akikwa, like the brilliant, shining, ancestral spirit. So those are 42, and that's also part of where the 10 Commandments came from, if you've ever heard of those. That Europeans decided we can't do all 42, we'll just do 10. The idea of judgment, because there was a judgment scene, all those were derived from ancient Kemet as well. So, one of the core elements of Ma'at, you had truth, justice, righteousness, propriety, harmony, balance, order as those main principles. Propriety is doing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time. And you find that all of those principles are just different manifestations of saying the same thing. But I think that when we look at why wisdom is so valued amongst African people, it's because it's not just knowing something, it's knowing the correct time to do it and the correct time not to do it. And I think that that's one of the core elements of Capoeira, of someone who's able to do it successfully and implement it, successfully, is being able to do the correct thing. Like the young guy, he was shaking hands with you and he's thinking we're done. All of a sudden the kick comes. He's learning wisdom. I could have told him, all right, just, look out, people will do these things and blah. It doesn't make sense. It's like, what are you talking about? But it made sense then. So now he's learning when to do the correct things and when the correct times are for those.
Okay. Okay.
Brem? Yeah.
Here's Obadele, of how you see the history of Capoeira. So how it came to be, what Capoeira and all that trajectory across the Atlantic and back. So how do you see that whole trajectory of Capoeira up to this point in time here in this place?
Yeah. This is a good question. For me, if you go back and look at the oldest combat sciences, so-called martial arts, I don't prefer martial arts because it's associated with Mars, the Roman deity of war. Why are we naming something after a Johnny come lately? We've been doing it, whatever. And if you look at the oldest depictions of these combat sciences, you'll find in, again, the Nile Valley, the tomb of Beni Hassan is the modern day name. You'll see all these depictions on the walls of all these different positions, striking positions, grappling positions, so forth and so on. And when you're looking at it, if you have eyes to see, you're like, this is all the moves of Capoeira. It's like a Capoeira manual, and this goes back thousands of years. Recently, on one of my sites, we had a discussion thread about what is the utility of naming different arts or different sciences. Is it useful? Is it not useful? And, there are a few different responses. Always good in terms of being able to identify lineage and these types of things. But again, thinking about propriety, someone who is in the midst of combat on the battlefield, are they thinking, I have to strike because my art tells me I need to strike, even though I should grapple this guy who's trying to kill me right now? No, my art is this, and therefore all we do is strike. Or this person who's trained wrestling, the guy is at striking distance and has a spear or whatever, a sword. You may need to, modify what you're doing. Oh, all I do is wrestling, but how are you going to do it? I think these are concerns that would be ridiculous to anyone who is actually using it for any type of practical purpose. Is it striking? Is it grappling? Is it headbutting? Is it this? Oh, my rules tell me I can't do this. My rules tell me that. So just saying all of that to say, to delineate Capoeira as something, let me come to this. There are different ideas about categorization. One is what they call a classical theory categorization, which is something like necessary and sufficient conditions. Here is a line, if it's this and only this, then it fits in the category. If it's not, it goes to the outside of the line, and never the twain shall meet. Here's this complete set, here's another set. They're opposites, they're opposed, black and white, blah, blah, blah. And then there's another theory called prototype theory, which sees, an idea of there's a prototypical thing, and then there are gradients that go out, where it may be less and less of what the prototype is, it may be less and less. You can see it like a spectrum or any analogy like that. And that's more of how I see capoeira. For a lot of people, when I talk to them, they're like, that isn't capoeira, but this is capoeira, and that isn't capoeira. And it depends on what they do. If they do Regional, they're looking at Angola and say, that's not capoeira, this is capoeira. Vice versa, the Angoleros, what they're doing isn't. And that's more, I've heard more of that in the U.S. When I went in Brazil, I didn't see that, same level of animosity, for lack of a better word, between Regional and Angola. Both of them were looking down at Capoeira da Rua. Don't go out to Mercado Modelo, they're this. You need to come to the academies, and then you tell them, I'm at this Angola academy, okay, that's fine. Or you tell the Angoleros you're at the Regional, they're like, whatever, but it's fine. But both of them are like, Dahua, no. You don't need to be on the streets. They don't know what it is. So again, this idea of how are we categorizing, I think these are some fundamental questions in terms of the philosophical background from which we're approaching it. In terms of the history of capoeira, I would take it back to those earliest, going back thousands and thousands of years, beyond what is this term that we are putting into this box, but what is this unbroken tradition? What is this river that's flowed from Africa to everything else? When they talk about Greco-Roman wrestling, that's ridiculous. Where did the Greeks learn that from? And then you can see the documented evidence of this wrestling tradition in the Nile Valley, which is where all human beings came from. So why are we delineating it and saying that this is, whatever, as opposed to this? So again, I think that those earliest combat traditions are the roots of capoeira. I think in different places it had different manifestations. There's this guy TJ-OB, I'm sure you're familiar with. He has very good documentation of fighting traditions all along the Atlantic world, but all throughout Africa as well. And I was just looking at a lecture he gave at UNC. Let me turn this off. This is messing up. I want to say it was in 2013. But in it, he was basically just documenting what he calls fighting for honor, which was, in his idea, the objective that people were.
That's the name of his book.
Yeah, that's the name of his book as well. And that's, again, in his idea, that's the objective of why we're doing what we're doing and why it manifests in different places. In the U.S., knocking and kicking. In Brazil, capoeira. You can see, all these different arts throughout. And, again, to me, I think there's a gradient. I think that the root is what is the objective? To survive, to defend your family, all of those things that are very practical. And then you can see different ways that Africans have thought about how to do that. And then you can also tie it to the scholar who I mentioned before, he passed away, Fukiao. That's where a lot of TJ-OB references him, Daniel Dawson, anyone who talks about Dikenga, Kalunga, all these core aspects of the Bakongo worldview, most of them are citing him. And even if we look at Dikenga, last year I gave a presentation on Anansi stories and Ijakba stories, Anansi coming from modern day Ghana, Akan people, and Ijakba coming from the Yoruba people, and basically looking at a theoretical framework of how to analyze these stories using Dikenga. A lot of the ideas of story structure is like it goes to a crescendo, it comes down, and that's the end, as opposed to this idea it starts here, it rises, and it says this is a part of the story that you can see, but what happens after it's done? Well, what is it doing in your consciousness? How does it impact on life, all these things, to the next time that it's told, either in the same story form or through the living of one's life. So you can see it basically as the sun rising and setting, and this idea of the human being as being a living sun, that again, that dates back to the Nile Valley, notions of Ra, Heru, the sun rising, setting, and then rising again. They talk about the solar bark, and then it also transversing through the night sky and then rising again. And to me, it would be very difficult for someone to understand capoeira without understanding that type of dikenga notion, and understand that's why we are, so-called upside down. This is why all of the songs are talking about the ocean. This is what Kalunga is talking about. The different points, Kala, Tukula, Luvemba, Musoni, the ancestral realm. It helps us understand why we, bow down to the barren boughs. So I think all of those things are, again, a continuous stream, so I would see all of those. I am saying all of that also to say, when we have people who say, oh, capoeira started in Brazil, or capoeira started even in Angola, it's like, where is the cutoff point where you would say, all right, this is just a magical thing that popped up, there's a proverb in Tri Okotonwanoma, which translates to a crab doesn't beget a bird. And then another one in Kiswahili, Mwana Simba ni Simba, a child of a lion is a lion. So even if you want to go to evolution or whatever, you can see very small changes away from this prototypical structure to become this, to become that, to become this. But all of them have the same, core thing. So for me, I don't see capoeira as being divorced from all of those things. And I think that also plays a role in how I approach it. So we deal with capoeira, dealing with that core thing of doing the correct thing at the correct time, the appropriate thing at the appropriate time. And then in the interaction, attacking without being attacked. When we approach it from this type of perspective, then it becomes, okay, what are the different ways in which you can accomplish that? You can accomplish that with your legs. You can accomplish that with your hands. You can accomplish that with your head. You can accomplish that with sticks. You can accomplish that with swords. You can accomplish that with guns. You can accomplish that with grenades. So even into how are we accomplishing it, we start to come to certain principles where you can even see what you're doing on an individual level could be applied to an army level. So if you study like some of the warfare tactics of Hannibal, you'll see the capoeira inside of it. Actually, my colleague here, one of his brothers is in the Ghana army, and he's deployed to Congo, to Sierra Leone, fighting rebels over the past, few decades. And he talks about what they do, that usually they have orders not to fire unless they are fired upon. But they say this doesn't make sense because if I'm fired upon, I will be dead. How can I fire? So what they say is that usually they'll deploy some few troops as a diversion, and they'll start shooting once they see where the rebel position is. They'll start shooting, and then when the rebels, are either fleeing to wherever, they're fleeing directly into the ambush. So now they're all cut down, and what he said, which morally, ethically, I'm not sure, but he says that his brother says, don't let anyone live so that they can't say that we fired, first. But in looking at like these types of war strategies, it sounds exactly like capoeira. Like that's what I would do on an individual level if I was actually trying to accomplish my goal. I would set up a diversion, and I do this all the time. I'll show them this, and then I'm coming with the leg. I'll show them the leg, and then I'm coming with this. I'll show them either, and then I'm coming with the head, or establishing patterns. So I may hit them here low with the leg, hit them there low with the leg. Now they're starting, this is part of why there's a need for contact, because once they start to feel there's a degree of pain, unintentionally, subconsciously, unconsciously, they'll say, I need to defend this, this hurts. Once they go to defend this, that leaves all of that open. So again, these principles, you can see them going to Hannibal, you can see them from Jehudi Mes in ancient Kemet, you can see it from Queen Nzinga, when you can see it in Chaka, you can read about it amongst the Asantes, that this core idea. And to me, once we look at it from doing the appropriate thing at the appropriate time, you can see how capoeira, if it's approached from that perspective, it can't lose. And because if you're doing what's appropriate at the appropriate time, how could you? Or even if you take it to attacking without being attacked, if I'm never attacked, how can I possibly be defeated? If I'm the only one, and sometimes I have people who come from taekwondo, from karate, from other capoeira, regional, whatever, and they're doing whatever they're doing, but I'm just focusing on, as long as I'm doing that goal, and basically it makes everything much more simple, as opposed to like early on when I was learning capoeira, I was memorizing moves and doing the things that they were saying to do. And in the heat of the interaction, it makes it very difficult. I'm trying to remember, should I do this, should I do that? But if you just give yourself that task of attacking without being attacked, your body itself will do all of the rest. It will just say, you've given me the objective and I'm going to do it. And sometimes I even look at the videos, we record all these videos, and I'll say, I don't know how to do that thing that I did. Like if you just asked me to do this thing out of context, I wouldn't even know the name of this and that, but it's perfect for that specific context. So, and the movie Besouro, at the very beginning is a line which I find to be the most important thing, in the most important line in the whole thing, which is when Mr. Alipio is asking him, who taught you how to walk? And young Besouro says, it was my mother and my father. And he's like, no, your body taught you how to walk. Your body taught you how to walk. Like as he's trying to explain this deep point to him, he was running off looking at a beetle, and that's how it goes into how he got to be Besouro. But this idea of the body teaching you how to do whatever it is that you're doing, especially in this context as we're discussing capoeira, that I find that that's actually what happens, that your body will teach you how to do it. If you get hit one time, your body will tell you, I don't like that. And it will teach you how to do whatever type of esquiva you want to call it, or whatever type of negativa you want to call it. You will, come to learn that. Yeah.
And what happened then when this large amount of people from Africa were forcibly taken to the other side of the Atlantic, and with that kind of flow of techniques, knowledge, wisdom that has been accumulated? What happened?
Yeah, so to come to Angola, to come to Ngolo, it's interesting because I've been looking forward to seeing videos of Ngolos, to seeing videos of Kambangula, and there's other different arts with different names there. So the documentary, the Jogo de Corpo, or I actually have it right here. It was very interesting to look at because the guys, the old guys, are recognizing, that's just how it's done. Yeah, you're doing it. That's how we do. And then they're getting out, they're doing the kicks, they're doing these types of things. I definitely see it as a flow of techniques, mainly coming from there. But I also see, different things, especially later on, the infusion of the candomblé from the Yoruba, breakup of Oyo Empire and so forth and so on. But it's definitely a flow where you can see a very direct thing. But a lot of people, there's this ongoing debate as to whether capoeira is African or whether it's Brazilian or whether it's Afro-Brazilian. And I think about it in terms of like in the U.S., you have some people in the U.S. who identify, black people, who identify as I'm American. There's no African, who is this girl? Raven Simone, who used to be on the Cosby Show. I'm American. Leave the African. I'm not African. I'm just plain American. Another guy, Jesse Lee Peterson, he's a reverend or whatever. I'm 100% American. Thank God for slavery. I'm blah, blah, blah. So you have, again, this is a gradient. So you have those, and then in the middle somewhere you have what Du Bois used to talk about, double consciousness, where people say I'm African American or I'm Black American or whatever. So it's like, all right, it's a question of allegiance. Are you African? Are you American? Whatever. Then you have this other side of the spectrum, people who are African, and not because they were born in Africa, but because they understand Africa in a very broad sense of what that is. And I think you have a similar thing in Brazil as well. You have people who identify as African. You know, I went down there, they have the Steve Biko Center. You have people who have this level of consciousness that we're all Africans. And when I was there, they were actually talking about making Brazil part of the AU, bringing in, you know, the diaspora as a zone or region of the AU. And, you know, there are people who are, you know, people who see themselves as African and connected to this global identity. You know, they were for that. Then in the middle, again, you have the double consciousness or schizophrenia, however you want to call it. I'm Afro-Brazilian, you know, that's my identity. Then you have others who are like, I'm Brazilian, I'm white, you know, they're black as all outdoors, but they're trying to, you know, see themselves as being, I'm Portuguese even, you know, I'm European even. So, and not necessarily even based on their complexion, that's just what their mindset is. So I think that in terms of capoeira, you definitely had a stream of continuous techniques coming mainly out of Angola, looking mainly at Ngolo and some of the other forms there. But I don't, but I don't think that it's African because it comes from Angola or those techniques come from Angola. I think it's African because wherever Africans are, what they do is African. If you're an African, then you're an African. It's like how we were mentioning before. Malcolm X has the quote, if a cat has kittens in an oven, that doesn't make them biscuits. That, you know, wherever you are. And Peter Tosh had a song, as long as you're a black man, you're an African. That, you know, Marcus Garvey, I think some of the best thinkers who we as African people throughout the world look up to, a lot of them have this notion or this idea that, you know, we're Africans. So whether or not we were doing it in Angola before or whether we started doing it once we're there. Matter of fact, I just gave a presentation at the Linguistics Association of Ghana, basically dealing with the connections between Ebonics and Asante Chi, Black English in the U.S. and Asante Chi, and showing a lot of, you know, quotative, like how people say. And then he was like, I'm going to the store. And then I was like, and then you give the quote that the person said to you, and you're introducing it with like. That the same thing happens in Asante Chi. And people are asking me, well, do you think it came from Asante Chi and those people came there and brought this thing? And I was like, I don't, at this point, have the documentation to say that for certain or not. But I think even it's possible as independent innovation that you have Africans here saying this is how we solve this linguistic problem. You can have Africans there who are thinking with an African worldview and say this is how we solve this linguistic problem and coming up like that. So I wouldn't say, oh, because these are Africans in the U.S. who are doing it. And I also think like a couple of centuries in the 1800s, Africans there were more clear on who they were. So you had people naming things African Methodist Episcopal Church, African Free Society, African this, African that. And I think part of getting people to this double consciousness thing is the utility of that. If you're not clear on what your allegiance is, then, you know, how would you be able to fight for this larger collective? And I see that as well as connected to the idea of being white as basically a pan-European identity. Let's let everybody migrate in, you know, let's let English bring in all these different things. So, yeah, in terms of the techniques, I see those specific techniques coming mainly from Angola, coming mainly from that worldview, but I see that as a shared worldview throughout the African continent, this idea of Dikenga and the expression of Dikenga. If you know, and you'll actually see the symbolism in different places as well, But if you look at how we do the storytelling, look at how we do the combat traditions in different places, I think all of those are manifestations of a common African worldview.
So, can you, Obadele, kind of briefly explain to me how you see this the Kalunga and the Kenga manifested in Capoeira, like kind of in a simple language?
Yeah, I see it manifested in the sense of Kala is the sunrise, it's the birth, it's the beginning in terms of manifestation in the physical realm. From there, it goes up to a high point, which is called Tukula. That's actually my son's, one of his middle names. From there, it goes to Luvemba, and this is, represented by gray, represented by the ash, representing transition into the spiritual realm. And then you go into Musoni, which is the realm of the ancestors. You have this idea of birth and death. You have this. Sorry, you understand?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Now you have this idea of birth and death, but connected by this line Kalunga. You have this idea of ancestorship and adulthood, and connected by Mukula, this line. For me, when I see this, it makes me understand, one, why we do things in circular fashions, specifically going in the manner of what is called sometimes counterclockwise or anti-clockwise. If you look at when we do the Volta al Mundo, it's done in usually the same counterclockwise fashion. If you look at, for Akan people in the Akom, they have the spirit possession dance. When they do it, they're doing it in the same counterclockwise, anti-clockwise fashion. When you see people here in Ghana, when they're shaking hands, they do it in the same fashion. And then when you...
They
yeah, in the same way. Now, you can take it back when you look at the Temple of Dendera. This is again, going back to the Nile Valley, when you look at what's the so-called zodiac, it represents all the star constellations moving around, and you see the direction that all of them are facing. They're like anthropomorphic, like human bodies, but different animal heads representing these different constellations, and all of those are moving in this motion. So when I look at that, it shows African people being in alignment, going back to the concept of Ma'at with the cosmos, that when you're moving like this on the ground, you're mirroring how these constellations are moving up in the heavens. So I see this as, again, a larger African worldview of being, one, connected to the rest of the cosmos and actually being connected to a larger order. So it's not just happenstance, like, oh, you know what, let's shake hands this way this time, or let's just walk this way this time, or let's just dance this way this time. That there's a deeper understanding of why we're doing this. So when I see capoeira being done in a circle, when I see, the God boxers, when I see the spirit possession, all of these being done in this circle, I think at the core is coming back to this idea of a shared African worldview, and going back to some of those principles of Ma'at, doing things in harmony, balance, reciprocity, propriety, and things of that nature. So I see it in that. Also, when we're looking at Kunseke, that's the physical realm, that's where we are here. And Kumpemba, that's this lower realm, represented by the ancestors. The understanding of Mpemba is, matter of fact, in Kikongo they have an expression, Wenda Mpemba Mpolo, which translates to go with the white clay. Mpemba is the white clay, sometimes called kaolin. And it's interesting that if you see different African people, they'll have like this white powder on them, things like this. They'll have different marks and those things. That this white clay in Yoruba called Efun, here in Ghana they call it Shre, amongst the Bakongo they call it Mpemba. It has healing properties in the sense of, matter of fact, we were just looking at a thing on macaws, this type of bird, that eats all these poisonous berries and things like that. But what does it do? It goes to the riverside, gets the white clay, and all these different animals do that. That's what is done in Ghana. They actually sell it on the side of the road in these small little pellets, that if you have any type of stomach ailments, you just take that in and it absorbs whatever type of, stomach virus or anything that you're dealing with. So, this is a connection to the ancestors. So it's coming from the earth, it's coming from down, it's coming from the ancestral realm. And then you have, Kumseke, and these are seen as like mirror images of each other. So when a person dies here, it seems like they're being born in Kumpemba. When the person, dies in Kumpemba, it's seen as they're being born here. That's why we have so many names representing reincarnation, all of those types of things, because it's seen as a continuation. So to me, again, like if we say, oh, it's just this thing that, people started doing in Brazil, how would you understand the circle? How would you understand why you're upside down? How would you understand that, you would be cutting yourself off from the connectedness from Angola, going back to the origin of all human beings along that valley, because we're just saying, and usually I find those who do it are the white Brazilians. There's a concept of culture banditry. So like in the U.S., rock and roll, black people started that. Now it's only associated with white people. Country music, banjo, banza, all of these are African instruments. All of those are only associated with white people. Jazz, they have that. Hip hop, like anything, breakdancing, anything. Like if you look at breakdancing videos now, you'll see like one black person out of 1,000. So, it's a thing of, well, how are they going to legitimate themselves doing this thing that they obviously didn't originate? Well, they can do it by saying this is American. Jazz is the one true American musical form. So now you don't have to deal with being African. Because if you say it's African, then the question next is, well, why are you doing it? What business is it of yours? I think it's the same thing in terms of capoeira. If you see it, this is one connected African thing that's going on, going back from antiquity up to now, well, then the question will become, well, why are you all doing this? And I think that that's also part of why they are so intent on, one, saying it's Brazilian, or at worst, Afro-Brazilian, but then also doing their best to make that part of the songs. Salvador, like, we need all of the philosophy, we need all of this to say that it started here, because that will legitimate my practice of it. Because if I say it's African, then I'm automatically illegitimate. So just in terms of, going back to this idea of how Dikenga, Kalunga, Mukula, all these concepts are there. I think if you have eyes to see it, then you'll see it throughout. Like before I get started, I always do Dikenga. I wear Dikenga. I have this bag for the past about 15 years. So people say, oh, what is this? The Dikenga, here. It explains why we do everything. Why do we do funerals, how we do things? Because the human being is a living son, and just because you can't see them anymore doesn't mean that they've stopped existing. The same brother, Desh Obi, in his lecture, he was talking about how, and it's exactly how it's done here in terms of the worldview. A young brother was sick, and they took him to the diviner to find out why he was sick, and it came up that, he was sick because he had a maternal uncle who loved to do ngolo, and since he's passed away, he hasn't been able to do it, so he wants you to possess his spirit so that he can do it again. That's why all these people in Ghana and Yoruba land, whatever, get initiated, usually because of that type of calling. So, to hear that, it's basically the same idea of the human being as a living son. They're there in the ancestral realm, and as they're traversing the ancestral realm, you're traversing this realm. And it also explains why it's the elder who does the naming at a naming ceremony, because that's the one who's most fit to recognize his own grandfather or grandmother when he comes back. and then vice versa. You come up here. Now, this is the elder who needs to do the naming ceremony, because who's going to recognize you other than yes, this is your same face, your same whatever, so we'll call you Nana Kofi, Nana Kwame, Nana Kweku, Nana Ama, and so forth and so on. So it explains why we do these things. Also, it explains the different parts of life. So you have different rites of passage. The first one is birth. You have the naming ceremony there. You go into your puberty rites as you get older. So you can see these as the markings along, the Dikenga. So we're marking things. You come to adulthood, which may be marked by marriage, children. You may get a chieftaincy title as an elder of the village, whatever. And then you come here, and now you pass on. Now you're being born down there. And it also explains how we understand, like, children who are stillborn and things of that nature. It's like you can picture the people in ancestral realm trying to do CPR and revive the person. So yes, we saved them, and then they bring them back from Kunseke to bring them back over there. Just like how if we have someone here, we would try to revive them and bring them back. So they see it as a tragedy. Oh, this child was born and died young here in the ancestral realm, but we see it, yes, we saved that person's life. So, again, coming back to this idea of capoeira as being everything that the mouth eats, you would see it in everything if you see it. But if you don't see it, then you look at everything and say, no, that's not capoeira. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. No, that's not it.
Okay. Obadele, has capoeira returned to West Africa? Or how do you see this, the emergence of capoeira groups and people like you teaching capoeira, introducing people to that word and that set of techniques? Or is it? Can we see it as a return, or how do you see it?
I think that's how people would best understand it. But for me, on a personal level, I would see it as capoeira hasn't left. It didn't go anywhere. It's always been here. It's, again, part of this unbroken tradition. And, there was a brother who was from Niger, and I was asking him...
From where?
Niger. They call Niger in English pronunciation, but it was from Niger. And I was asking him what martial arts or what combat sciences, whatever, do you all have there? And he was like, oh, we have Taekwondo, we have Karate, we have this. I was like, no, the indigenous ones. And he was like, oh, they just do wrestling. In my village, that's all they do is wrestling, but it's nothing. But yeah, we have Taekwondo, and he's listing off all these Eurasian things. And I think that part of our challenge is to get people to see, one, what they do as valuable in any way, shape, or form. I find a lot of people who are here who are interested in capoeira, they're interested because they see it as this is something foreign. This is, I saw in Only the Strong, something that's coming from outside, and everything from outside is better than anything from Africa, so let me do this outside thing. And then they're quite disappointed when they find out, oh, it came from Africa and this, that. Oh, that's not what we want to hear. We want to hear that this is on par with karate and taekwondo, even though you can beat up all of those people till the cows come home, but they still have this view of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan and Jet Li and all those types of things. So, yeah, in my own personal view, I wouldn't see it as having gone anywhere. I think that this is a manifestation of an African worldview. And like when I think about it and these correlations, if you look at any African who knows how to fight, if you look, whether in boxing, MMA, whatever, you see those who are called the greatest, whether it's Muhammad Ali, whether it's Sugar Ray Robinson, whether it's now Floyd Mayweather, whether it's Anderson Silva, whoever it is, if it's an African, they are...
Or Nelson, the Talon.
Yeah. So Zuma, Nelson, all of these. The specific thing that makes it African is that they're attacking without being attacked. They're dancing. They're moving. They're not just dancing for the sake of dancing. So people say, oh, yeah, it's a dance and it's this. It's not that just as happenstance, but it's necessarily that in order to accomplish the goal of attacking without being attacked. One is understanding of physics, that objects in motion tend to stay in motion, and it's easier to just redirect that motion as opposed to I'm at a standstill. Now I need to, generate this kinetic energy to just start moving all of a sudden. If you look at how they move, this idea of bobbing and weaving and all of those types of things, that's different from the Eurasian understanding of how they approach it. So you see them start off with these stances. You have this idea. Even like if you look at boxing in England, before they would like draw a line in the sand. This person stands here, this person stands there, and then we just hit each other. If you look at how they did warfare, they would line up all the British on one side, all the French on the other side. I'm pointing at you, you're pointing at me, and then we just keep shooting, and then eventually someone dies, and you run out of men, or you retreat, and then we pursue from there. But it's just this idea of I attack and I am attacked. You hit me, I hit you. You hit me, and they say that's a good fight. Look, it's a really good fight. They're hitting each other. They would have this idea of the officers weren't allowed to run away, so the cannonball would come here, be spinning around, that you're supposed to just be standing there and let it do that. Otherwise, your troops would lose morale. So when I see that, I see a lot of how the Eurasians approach. Again, what you do on an individual level is very much aligned with what you would do on a group, collective level. And the way that they do warfare, at least historically, and the way that they do individual combat, it looks like the same thing, as opposed to the way Africans did warfare in terms of guerrilla warfare tactics, doing decoys and having them come out, doing ambushes, all of those types of things. It's very much similar to this idea of staying in motion. I remember like reading handbooks of guerrilla warfare. Some would talk about how if you have this larger enemy who's encamped, let's say you only have 20 men and they have 1,000. You don't say, let's all line up my 20 against your 1,000, because my one man is the equivalent of like dozens of yours. So what I would do, I would be in the bush, I would come up, attack, and then I go back into the bush. I come up and attack and go back into the bush. So you keep losing, and I'm not losing any. You keep losing, and I'm not losing. That's what I see as Capoeira as well. Mm. Yeah. So.
Okay. And what is going on with these specific capoeira groups that are called capoeira? What do they have to offer to people in Ghana?
This is somebody actually told me, and I wasn't able to confirm this, that there was somebody who was here in the 1980s who had a capoeira group, and apparently he went somewhere.
Tired.
He may be tired, sleepy, hungry. I'm going to start off with changing his diaper and see if that does something. Well, the way I came to it, there was a brother named Rob who trained with Mr. Jean Grange, and he had started up a group at Aviation Social Center. Actually, I think that when I was coming, they had just started meeting, and what he wanted was for me to co-teach with him. He came to know that I had a background as well. So we started co-teaching for a few months, and then he moved away. And when he moved away, basically I took over the group solely, and from there we've been doing it basically nonstop since 2009. Different students and people coming and going, so pretty much a steady stream. And since that time, one of the things, our core things, is that we do this by and for people of African descent, however they define, themselves. So, sometimes we have people who don't look, typically very African, but if they see themselves as being African or one of their parents or something of that nature was African, then okay, by all means they should come participate. Because of that, we had one brother who was coming out of France who took exception to that because he had a white wife who didn't self-identify as being African. So he was like, okay, I want my wife to participate. So he broke off and started doing his own thing. So I think that was actually one of the issues. Another one is that we also do it as something practical. We're trying to defend our family, our nation, our race, and things of that nature. And when he came to class, we were actually just training hitting. He said this was my first time ever hitting anything. Like we had some of these, like the pads that we used before the hit. He said I've never made contact ever, in capoeira. And it really showed in terms of when it was his turn to try to spar with someone that he had never done it. Again, it's easier to go to a game from a fight than to think that you can go from it's easier to come down from a fight to modify it to be more kinder, gentler, whatever, than to go from only having done it as a game and now you want to elevate it to the level of fight, at least in my experience and observation. So he went off and did that, and we haven't collaborated on anything since then. He asked me to come and teach some of his white students. I declined. And that is what I know of in terms of another group that's actually has been active. I don't know if they're still active because he moved away and he was going to have another guy try to keep it going. I'm not aware of if they ever did do that. I also saw something online in Sawam, which is where they have the central prison, the main prison here in Ghana. There was a group that was based out of that town, and they had like a video or two, and I think there was a guy from Brazil, maybe with an NGO or something, who started showing them some things. And the video that they posted, you could see that what they were doing was like very rudimentary, that basically they learned some moves or memorized some moves, and that's what they were trying to operate with. And then another brother in Kumasi said that he was interested. He had a group of people who were interested, but it never really materialized for me. He was contacting me for me to go up there and show them some things. He had like a relative of his come and get a berimbau, because I've made some of the berimbaus and showed people how to make them using the materials that are here.
Yeah. And what could capoeira offer Obadele to specifically to the Tabon people, for example, who have this memories of Brazil, who have been, and I think none of them right now speak Portuguese, or the connection with Brazil is they can see it in different ways.
It's interesting you asked that.